and I've talked about inspector's eyebrows as a kind of metaphorical symbol. If you can interpret the inspector's eyebrows, then you're more likely of winning.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Rebecca, Leek, welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me and for responding to my request. So recently I put out a tweet on Twitter, obviously, to ask for head teachers and former head teachers to share their thoughts on Ofsted, which has obviously been in the news of late. So could we start firstly just by asking you to introduce yourself to our listeners, and also to explain why you responded to that tweet?
Yeah, so I am currently part-time. I do other things as well. But currently, I'm the executive director of the Suffolk Primary Headteachers Association. And in Suffolk, we have around 300 primary schools. So I'm swimming in that sea of primary school head teachers at the moment. Prior to that, I was a chief executive actually for a couple of years in Essex for 3 primary schools. And then prior to that, I was a head teacher, executive head teacher in Ipswich. And my run up to those roles was via actually a Senco route mainly. As a primary Senco and a secondary Senco. I actually started as a secondary Latin teacher, and have worked in primary and secondary settings, and then through leadership, and have had kind of really interesting system leadership roles in multi-academy trusts, two of those. So I've had about 14 inspections over quite a short period of time. And so including the school that I was head of in Ipswich, when I had to step in because the substantive head teacher wasn't able to be at work, and I had to step in, and we had an inspection very shortly after I stepped in. It was a tricky situation, and because then it was RI, and it was a second RI, required improvement for people that don't know. We then were subject to a lot of monitoring during COVID, so we had these very strange remote inspections when they inspected the school via a screen, and then we had our monitoring inspection, etc. So I've kind of tasted quite a lot of it over the last decade. Yeah.
Interesting, right? And so you just wanted to share that experience, I guess.
Well, I'm really interested in governance, and I see Ofsted as part of governance, which we can talk about in a minute. But the other thing is I did respond quite quickly to the terrible news about Ruth Perry, in terms of over that weekend I wrote a letter to the I drafted a letter to the board, to my board, and said, are you happy for me to put this open letter to Ofsted out? And we were one of the first organisations to do that, and it was picked up very quickly by the media, and I think I might have been quoted in every single local newspaper. Suddenly I was on the Today programme on Monday morning or Tuesday morning, and ITV, I was interviewed on the television, and I don't have a television, and people were messaging me saying they'd seen me on the television, and suddenly I had this huge responsibility to try and articulate what lots of people were saying, and discern, if you like, the position of head teachers, particularly with Suffolk. So I've been really in the mix over the last 10 days or so. So that's, I think, maybe why I particularly responded.
Right. Wow. I didn't know about the media coverage. That must have been quite terrifying to find yourself on the Today programme.
Yes, Nick Robinson. Although I think I haven't timed it, but it was something like 82 seconds or something, because they always run out of time. And I was actually going to be on the Jeremy Vine show, and I was listening to it on the phone, with me in the wings, so to speak, and then they ran out of time. So I spent half an hour listening to the Jeremy Vine show, including Michael Wilshaw, which was very annoying. And interestingly, which is a side point that I would just like to make, that on every occasion that I was asked to speak on the radio, and there was something of a panel, they always had the man first, or they had two men first, or they had the man, and then they listened to me for a bit and nodded, and then they went back to the man. So there was a very clear pattern as well about giving amplifying the voice of the man, or they thought there was more credibility in it or something. But I would just like to highlight that trend from my experience last week.
Yeah, interesting. Point noted.
Mm.
And so there's three questions that I generally ask to all my podcast guests, and we apply these to education generally, and they are essentially positives, challenges, and fixes. And I thought that might be a useful way to frame these conversations. And I've got about eight head teachers or former heads, I think, who've lined up to do this series of short episodes over the next few weeks. And so if it's okay with you, let's use that format to start with positives. And this could be about this. You might interpret this in any number of ways. It might be like positive aspects of, these Ofsted inspections that you've been through. It could be positive ideas about governance generally and about the need for schools to be inspected generally, however you wish to interpret it. But what do you think are the positives here?
Well, I think that education is extremely important, and we're in loco parentis when children cross that threshold into school. And so there's something about risk, isn't there? There's something about I've worked quite a lot in risk appetite and risk writing risk-based approach to things. So in thinking about, I've got 300 children here, what are the key risks, and then checking that's being looked at, and it's too high a risk to just go, well, it'll probably be okay. I think is important, and so some level of checking, and all business models really, and I can talk about Stafford Beer and the viable systems model, which is really interesting in terms of it looks for the least amount of checking, but it does check. So say you've got a big factory and there's a machine, and the thinking about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, there's like toothpaste tubes, and somebody has to check that the lids are on. And how many times do you check? Do you check every 100? Do you check every 1,000? Who does the checking? How does the checking happen? You just have to do some checks sometimes. I'm really interested in permaculture as a theory, as a framework, and there's a big aspect of observing. So if you're a grower and you have a farm or you have land, the regular walking about is, if you like, a check. It's just might be a soft check, but you're looking and you're going, oh look, that's really interesting. The increased water that's in this corner of the field, because you maybe have chopped down some trees. If you don't notice that, if you don't have a look regularly enough, then things will start to get out of hand. So I think basically, in answer to your question, what's good about it is it's really essential to make sure that everything is dynamically healthy, as in good and getting better, which is, I think, what most people would want. I mean, some people might disagree, but so I think it's really healthy to do checking, if you like. So that's what I would say is a key positive of inspections, or of having a strong governance framework, which can be very light and very lean. So I'm not saying we have to have a very heavy one, but you do have to have one, because it actually generates change and growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And so is this just a theoretical positive, or could you point to, of these 14 inspections that you've been through, could you point to positive aspects of them? Are there times when you thought, oh, do you know what, actually that was a good check, I feel better, or I think that was helpful or useful in some way, or some aspect of an inspection maybe?
Yeah, I don't think that the inspection framework, the methodology, is right. I think it is ill-matched for producing. I don't think it is a good checking framework in terms of what they're looking for, how it's done, the coercive power that's kind of embedded within it. So it's really difficult for me to say when did I think it was good. I suppose I did meet a few people who were interested in what the school that I was working at was doing at the time. I certainly got a career boost from playing the game well, to state it really cynically.
Right.
So I had a really interesting experience as a secondary school Senco, which I loved. It was a great job, and I didn't do it for long enough, I don't think. But we were all right. There was a lot of work going on in the school. I think I was quite forward thinking as a Senko. I hadn't been a Senko in the previous code of practice. I had kind of quite fresh eyes in terms of the new code of practice, and I was interested in action research, and I had a really good deputy that I worked with, and we'd done this interesting action research project with LSAs, learning support assistants, those kind of supernumerary bodies who are so amazing and brilliant, and not supernumerary at all, for the record. But we did a project around that, and then that came up during the inspection, and it was really, I suppose, joyful for me to talk it through with somebody and get recognition. And then the senior leadership team also recognised that I was a bit of a deal clincher. I might be overestimating my role in it all, but it did feel, I did get some like, thank you so much at the end of the second day. You were real, there was a real, I don't know if I was a turning point, but they triangulate, and that meeting with me, I think, really tightened up the judgment for the school.
Mm.
So that was, I suppose, from a personal and professional level, it felt satisfying, and it was nice to get some recognition. I don't know if it needed to be within an Ofsted inspection, and it was so desperate and so highly stressful. So we were desperate to get the good, which we did get. I don't know if that was healthy, but I certainly got accolades for having helped with that. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I totally understand. I've had similar experiences and seen that play out many times as well. Thank you for that. And so let's move into the challenges. You said that you don't think that the framework is a good check at the moment. It's not fit for purpose. What are the key issues that you see with it? Let's talk about the challenges with the framework itself, and then we'll move into some of the stories. And I know that you're in touch with many head teachers who've been bruised by their experiences with Ofsted. Let's talk about some of those challenges as well, but maybe we'll start with the framework.
I think, well, there are many issues. I think something that's fundamental and is being destructive, I really do think it's destructive, is this straitjacket of what a good education looks like. And whilst Ofsted, or whoever, also worked on the framework, and I don't actually have that knowledge, maybe we should all know, and I know it was probably done it has been done consultatively, hasn't it, over time. But this remembering more, knowing more, and remembering more, these little sentences that land in a handbook that look, quite innocent, or fidelity. So this phonics thing and the fidelity of the scheme, they land in the frame, in the handbook, and then the profession, there's like an explosion around these words. And so phonics and the commodification of phonics schemes, the madness that has then exploded from this one word, I think is quite honestly unethical, because there are companies that have gone, oh, we can tweet that and do it, and now the school has to buy a whole new set of books. And it's like teachers have, and I mean this with the greatest respect, but we suddenly kind of stop thinking and go, well, hold on a minute, we do actually know how to teach children to read, synthetic phonics. There's an aspect of that that's really strong and incredibly useful to help children, there's no denying that. But to suddenly throw out all our reading books, and start all over again. The number of Facebook page posts I've seen on school leader Facebook groups, oh, we're getting rid of all our you know.
Wow.
Why are you getting rid of all your reading books? Because they're totally fine. And a lot of these new ones are deadly, really deadly, because they don't have any narrative in. And children love stories. The Biff and Chip books, whatever, people say, oh, I'm getting rid of all the Biff and Chip books because they're old fashioned and da-da. But children love them because they're a story about a family. And yes, there's they're dated like Roald Dahl books that I mentioned before, and so maybe there are issues with them, but there's just this madness that spins out of a single word, and then the coercive power that Ofsted wields, which means that we'll be punished if we don't do what they say, which is exactly how it works, means that we won't take any risks with that. Reading is too high risk. It's the first thing that we know that they inspect. And so we go through the handbook like a tooth comb and do exactly what they say, rather than going, well, I've got 11 children, across reception and year one, because I'm a tiny school, and we've got these books, and we are able to read individually with each of the child each day. And no, I don't do whole class phonics because I've got 11 children and we're a mixed year group and we do little groups and we've got some phonics embedded in our teaching. And it's like we almost stop thinking and suddenly have to go, right, do we do a whole class phonics? And then
Mm.
there's a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old sitting there on the carpet looking at Fab, PHAB, which by the way is the name of a specialist assessment book, but also it's an alien word. It's just madness. Whereas, can we just be sensible and teach our children and have one so that they can have childhoods?
Yeah,
so
right.
so so there's that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And that word fidelity is fascinating, isn't it? Because like fidelity is often used in like in sound, like whatever magazines, isn't it? Like the fidelity of your record player. It means like to what extent is it like an accurate copy? So it's like copying accuracy, as though it's just like so that there is this blueprint, there's this template of perfection, and everybody just has to be identical, replications of that original sort of source idea. And that's what a good system looks like. And it's very much based on this idea of a machine, that the
Yes.
education system is a machine
Yes.
with inputs and outputs, and it's all very measurable and reliable, and there's cause and effect. And that's just an idea. That's just an idea about how things work. And actually, it's not a particularly good idea when it comes to organizations that are made of people, because
Yeah.
people are not widgets. They
No.
have values, they have life experiences, they have traumas, they have, falling outs and friendship groups, and there's politics, and there's so many layers of complication in a school or in a school system, that the metaphor of the system as a machine, and that this is all sort of codifiable, and that we can
Yeah.
just sort of break this down into little chunks and get everybody to do those in an iterative way, that's the way that we improve. It's quite a problematic idea, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So there's one handbook; it's centralised, and then that spreads out into the school system, and then it has a real impact. And there's this coercive power and fear that's in the middle of it. So we won't mess with it. It takes a really strong leader to go, actually, I've written a different strategy. And when Ofsted come, I will talk them through it, and I understand my pedagogy, and I understand the approach to this. But we've got a lot of young head teachers, and this is not me saying that young head teachers are not able to be great head teachers at all, but it just takes a certain maybe wisdom that can come with years. Some people have wisdom, when they're young as well. So I don't want to generalize, but it takes a real strength of leadership to do something that is potentially risky in terms of and it's much safer. So if you're, say, in your 30s and you've been a deputy head and then you're a head of a primary school, why would you put your career on the line and take a risk and go, do you know what, I'm just going to stick with a mixed diet of phonics books, and maybe there will be a child with 2 different phonics books in their book bag, and one of them might be in line with the phase of phonics that they're learning, and one of them might not be. Do you know what? I'll have that conversation when the inspector comes. And it's risky because you might not win that battle as well, even though it's fine. uh, so it's got all these repercussions. And as for the remembering, the knowing more and the remembering more, children, there's all sorts of theories of child development and knowledge about child development. And let me tell you that play and stories is strong in there in terms of evidence and impact. Children synthesize the world around them, and then they build up knowledge and understanding. And they don't really learn it by sitting in a row and being taught 3 things that hopefully next lesson they can remember when they're 6. They learn best when they're when they told a story about being in the forest, and then they're in the forest and they remember the word forest and experience it and know what it's like, and then they've got curiosity about it, etc. I might sound too progressive for some people, but really, if you watch children, how do they learn about the world? They listen to stories and they play and they talk about it, and it's our job to facilitate that in the best way possible, not to sit them in rows so that next week, if an Ofsted inspector can come in, they can say, I remember we learned about forests. That's not childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you use the word progressive there, because I think that certainly in some quarters, people deemed that Ofsted of like 10 or 15 years ago was too progressive, and that they were wanting to see lots of, like child-led learning and like cooperative learning and lots of group work and so on. And if there was too much teacher talk, that was deemed to be a bad thing. And there's been this sharp correction to the opposite end of that spectrum, if you like, where they've defined learning. I think they borrowed like Kirshner, Sweller and Clark's definition of learning as a change in long-term memory. And everything's filtered through this idea, like you say, of knowledge and remembering, even to the extent that there was some recent guidance, I think, that Ofsted put out about early years, and they were talking about throwing and catching a ball, but they weren't talking about it as a skill. They were framing it as the child's knowledge. That it was like them knowing how to catch and throw a ball, and that their knowledge is intact. And it's fascinating that they're sort of performing these linguistic and intellectual gymnastics to try to squeeze the reality, like you say, of child development, which is very, very diverse and complicated. And like you say, it's about meaning making and understanding yourself, and the social and emotional aspects of learning are all really, really intertwined and interconnected. And some sort of like input output curriculum goes in, test checks knowledge. It's just so inadequate as a framework for understanding child development.
But then you have to think about what tool they have. So what they're doing is they're modeling their inspection around the tool that they have rather than the other way round. So at the moment, they've got the ability to go in and for 2 days and talk to some children and look at some books. And so they've gone, how can we check the education using that tool? And so that's and then we can ask the children what they can remember. And so they're building their inspection framework around a tool that they've decided is a good tool. So it's kind of it's all illogical because it's born from that. Really interesting.
Yeah. And so I wonder if you could share, if you'd be happy to, some sort of like insights or snapshots or anecdotes, possibly either from your own experience or from those of head teachers. Like, why was it that you, like, in the wake of the reason that you wrote that letter following the horrendous news about Ruth Perry, this obviously resonated with something in you, that you're thinking that what she went through was not just some outlier, that actually quite commonly people are having very difficult experiences at the sharp end of an Ofsted inspection. I wonder if you'd be happy to just share a few sort of glimpses into what that can be like.
Yeah, well, actually, I on the first day of my inspection, so this was the inspection at a school that I'd been at for, I think, 8 or 9 school weeks. I remember being upstairs. We had a lovely event. It was a cross-trust event where some children had come across and they were learning from one of the service leads, one of the operational service leads, about how much budgeting for stationery. They did this lovely exercise where we had lots of year 5s or something from across the trust, which was 14 schools, I think, at the time. And, how should we buy Pritt sticks all together, and having a look at some of this maths modelling. It was really great. And then somebody came in and went, Miss Leek, there's a phone call. And I'd only been there for 8 or 9 weeks, and I just went, it's too early, it's too early, it's too early. Because, just give me another term because what happens is if you then get an RI, that's it for another 2 years. Whereas the school was on this lovely, nearly there point, you know, and I knew it would be all right. And it was too early. My heart just sank. And then the day that the inspector came, which was obviously the next day with his team of 3, it was my first meeting in an office. He's there opposite me on a table, laptop, tap, 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 tap. I can't see what he's written, what he's writing. And he just says to me, well, we're looking at a special measures situation, aren't we? That's what he said, which is inadequate for people that don't know.
Yeah.
So he'd made his mind up.
In the initial meeting, before he'd looked at anything, he said that. Was that just based on data? Yeah.
So they've looked at the IDSR, and he was, you know, the data was bleakish. Let's say it was bleakish. It was low and a bit flat for the previous 3 years. So, you know, that is risky and not risky. That is not good enough, actually, historically, in many ways. But it was that. He sat there in front of me and he said, we're looking at a special measures situation.
Right.
So that was a great start. And I then proceeded to talk to him about what we were doing, etc., etc. Now, what was incredibly lucky, but so I think this gives insight into the serendipity of these situations. Is I got up and looked at something on the board which was behind him, because I'd put up some documents to grab from, you know, bulldog clips. I'd kind of put some different things up, school improvement plan or whatever, short-term list, blah blah blah. Went and got one down, and I happened to see what he typed. So I'm quite bad at reading situations. I'm very good at going into monologue. I'm quite bad at, but you know, I'm articulate at the end of the day, so I can do the talking, but I'm not very good at reading the signs. So I tweeted the other day, Ofsted is around your ability to be articulate in the moment, which I've got a big tick on, and also second guessing what the inspectors are thinking. I'm very bad at that. And it was all in evidence there, because I saw on his screen said the head teacher does not listen. I saw it.
Wow.
So I immediately regrouped myself and sat down and kind of did a whole, I wonder if he's listening to this, it's hilarious, because I just started then playing a different game. So I then sat down and I went, let me be honest with you. And then completely changed my tack to kind of show that I was a bit humble and I will listen to him, and oh yeah. And so he then started to respect me, if you like, as a leader, because I listened to him.
Fascinating.
And did all that. So suddenly I started playing his game, and a bit. Gosh, if he's listening, it's really very funny. And over the 2 days, I changed my mode from being articulate Rebecca, who definitely has got a plan here and let me tell you all about it, to kind of humble Rebecca that's like, yes, isn't it complex, and oh, tell me your advice here, and oh yes. And so by the end of the 2 days, I got a good for leadership and management. Obviously not just because I was suddenly a bit humble and listening, because I don't think I was doing a bad job as well at the end of the day, but I just think it's a really interesting example that if you can, and I've talked about inspectors' eyebrows as a kind of metaphorical symbol, if you can interpret the inspector's eyebrows, then you're more likely of winning. And I've actually said, I wonder if that's ableist, because there are some types of brains out there, you know, about neurodiversity and autism and things like that. There are sometimes types of brains out there that aren't very good at interpreting eyebrows, metaphorically speaking, but they might be really good at leading schools. But it comes down to whether they can just about second guess what the head teacher's saying, what the inspector's saying, because what they play with you is they say things like, so I've had a meeting with your deputy, tell me about her. And what they're doing is they're checking whether your opinion of them is the same as theirs. So if you go, oh no, she's completely on it, she definitely knows her stuff, she's very good at safeguarding and blah, blah. But you know, she probably would do well on a bit of a project around improving teaching and learning, you're kind of, and if they agree, then you're good. Whereas if they've met her and are not sure about how good they are, so to speak, then they go, oh dear, this head teacher hasn't got a measure of her staff. And so the whole thing is like, have I got this right? Am I aligned with what you're saying? And you're not actually thinking about the good of the school at all.
So
You're
it's like
just
a
trying to pick up on the nuance of the situation.
yeah, it's like the classic sort of bad teaching thing where it's like, guess what's in the teacher's head? You're playing a game of
Yes,
guess what's in the inspector's head, or
yes,
second guess. That's
yes,
fascinating, and that story like reveals something about the methodology here. You know, you were talking
yes.
about, you know, you're interested in practitioner inquiry and action research earlier, and so am I, and social research more widely. And so much of an inspection's outcome, it seems, depends on things like personalities and like interpersonal dynamics and ego strokes, you know, like you were just describing,
Mm,
like this person felt like they wanted to be listened to and that they were imparting their knowledge and that you were going to be a good head teacher
yes,
because you would do what they said, not because you were a good leader who already had a plan. And it was
yes,
about sort of it was about like validating them as people,
yes.
which is weird because they're not in the school for like for the, like, you know, the 99.99% of its
Mm,
time. And so that's fascinating, isn't it? Just like the actual the methodology, the way in which
mm,
they that it's portrayed as an objective judgment, but it's made that objective judgment is made by a subjective person or the lead inspector or their team of inspectors who are riddled with human cognitive biases and contradictions and values
mm.
and life experiences and
And
all of that.
yeah, and going back to what I said about men being, the first ones on the radio, I don't know what the demographics are of Ofsted inspectors, but I do know, for example, because I looked at it yesterday, because at the moment we've got all the stuff about the pay offer, and I was looking at a lot of the data around how the pay was originally set with the School Teachers Review Board, which is a fascinating document. And there are more men, white men. So the ladder, as you go up the ladder, it gets whiter and more male, and that's all in the data. And so if you think that inspectors are taken from people that are up on the ladder, it's white and male. And, that's a problem. That's a real problem. And primary schools, it is a predominantly, although it's complicated, but there are so many of us women leading primary school basically, and we get these we do get these very difficult situations with men who think that they know better, and maybe they do sometimes, but they don't always. And as you say, there's bias in there in terms of how we communicate, and get respect by being the right type of woman in that situation.
Mm, yeah.
I see it all the time. It's systemic, as we all know. I've got three daughters. My daughter's primary school, the story I always have is they decided that the year twos or whatever it was, the girls would be something in the play and the boys would be something else, and the girls got to be rose petals dancing and the boys got to be the thunder. And so what what does that say? It's just the girls all have to be lovely and meek and listen to the man, and the man has to be like strong and do the arguing. And that was played out for me in the Ofsted inspection. And
Mm.
I did go rose petally, and therefore I won. But goodness, it's a minefield.
Fascinating. Are there any other anecdotes that spring to mind, possibly from some other heads that you know about their experiences of Ofsted?
I think the biggest thing that's come out through Suffolk, through my talking to, well, I've got two really. One is small schools and this deep dive situation. So those of you listening, I hope if you're interested in Austin, you probably know about deep dives. But this again in the framework, going back to the whole one word, then creates this huge situation. Deep dives are when a inspector will choose a subject and will then dive into it, because they can't, we can't do everything, so we'll check one. I actually think a case study model with pupils would be really interesting, far better than a subject case study.
Mhm.
For SEND pupils in particular, I think it would be really good to do a case study model with individual children. but with less high stakes and silliness, obviously. So in a small school, you might have 2 or 3 classrooms, and you have to do a curriculum model. That means that you go through a kind of cycle of topics whereby different age groups are together, and so you do end, one very sensible way of doing things in small primary schools, and maybe in all schools, to be honest, but that's another conversation, is a topic-based curriculum. And so it might be the wind and the willows, and so there's geography there and rivers, there's science and habitats, there's friendship and PSHE, there's literacy and stories, there's art, there's all sorts of things, and different children will come at it in different ways, and that is a very sensible thing to do if you've got 80 lovely children in your school. The Ofsted inspector marches in and says, "I want to see your geography curriculum." And of course, if you're playing the game really well, and I'm sure lots of schools have done this, they've pulled out from each module and topic what's covered in geography and the wind and the willows bit. But I do ask, what use of time was that? Whereas actually the best use of time might have been a teacher looking at all the artwork that the children had produced in the last lesson and going, gosh, they really like the silver birch thing that we were talking about. So let's do some stuff with silver birches. That's a far better use of a wonderful creative teacher's time. And so this spiral around curriculum and progression maps and everything, it's, and so lots of small school teachers have talked to me about this and how to grapple with these deep dives and be ready and have the documentation ready, where it is so ill-fitting to how, a mixed age group, and any primary school, if you ask me, should, if you ask me, be running.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And so you said there was 2 things. The first thing was small schools and deep dives.
Thank you. And the second thing is, we've had the chair of Suffolk Primary Headteachers. So I'm the person that does the work, and he's the chair of the board, if you like, that I answer to. And he's got 2 schools. He's an executive head of a federation of 2 schools in Felixstowe. He's got an infant school and a junior school, and he had 2 inspections 8 school weeks apart, the same situation. So they are historically good, so they were having a checker kind of inspection, the quick in and out, section 8, are you still good or not? And basically, to cut a long story short, they were completely different, and that's the thing. So the methodology, if you like, was different, how they picked the deep dives. He has one Senco across the 2 schools, and now I might be changing it a little bit because obviously this is now second hand, but in summary, he has a Senco across the 2 schools. In one inspection there was somebody that knew stuff about SEND, and in another there wasn't, and so the rigor and the experience of the same Senco in the 2 inspections was completely different. And so it just again makes you kind of go, well, I mean, I want rigor. Particularly with SEND, I'm in a Senco. I really think it's so important, and if we get it right, and it needs to be systemic through the school, a whole school approach. And if you ask me, all head teachers should have been Sencos, and then all Ofsted inspectors should have been Sencos, and then head teachers, and then Ofsted inspectors. I think that would be very good. And so we're letting the children down, who are the ones who are in need of the greatest expertise, if just, there wasn't an Ofsted inspector that day who actually knew much, so he could just waffle it through. That's not okay.
Yeah, totally. I can see that, and I've seen something very similar happening on a micro level, where there was a colleague in an inspection where I was teaching, and they were seen twice in a day, and they got a 1 and a 4 in the same day. And you think, well, which one are they then? Like, is it possible? Because obviously, you could say, well, that lesson was a 1 and that lesson was a 4. But the way that label attaches itself to you as a person, like if you get a bad inspection, if you get a bad lesson judgment, and I know that they don't grade lessons anymore, at least not explicitly. Maybe they,
but it happens. But it happens in terms of the judgment that lands on the school. It sticks. Of course,
yeah, absolutely.
For so long, the school where I was the head, where we got that RI, although in 3 areas we got good, by the way, but we got RI overall because of the limiting judgment thing. It's still RI. It's still RI over 3 years later. So they say they'll come back and re-inspect within 30 months. I think it's now 38 months. That is not an RI school at all. It wasn't
Yeah,
really an RI school then, for whatever that means anyway.
yeah,
And so estate agent search engines, that school, RI. How many children do you think they get putting that down as first place in the local area? Not as many as they might because of the silly labels.
yeah, of
You
course.
know.
And even 30 months is like, somebody tweeted the other day about how, like, if your car fails its MOT,
Yeah,
and it's like you need to just go and get a new tire because the
yeah.
tread's worn a bit thin, and you sort it out, and then they re-inspect it, within whatever
Mm,
the day, or
yeah,
within, obviously, it's hard to do that logistically with Ofsted, but there's you could be closer to, within a week or within a month than like 30
yeah,
months is ridiculous, like you say, because that has such a massive effect on the lives of those teachers, on teacher recruitment and
yeah.
retention, on the house prices in the local area. And it's just it's not good. So the Ofsted, the HMA job description is out at the moment, isn't it? Amanda Spielman's reign is coming to an end. I'm not going to ask if you put an application, but just let's play the little imaginative game that you are appointed as the new HMA. You're given a carte blanche by, who's that, Gillian Keegan, whoever, just says, I know it's supposed to be arm's length, but probably behind closed doors, who knows what happens. You have a carte blanche. What would you do to fix the situation, to make Ofsted really positive and fit for purpose?
Well, it's a tank at the moment, and so there's no quick turnaround. So I will say that I know everyone says, well, just do that and do that. If you're used to large scale strategic improvement, then it doesn't really work like that. So just to say, I'm not going to say any quick fixes because
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking, it's not possible. But in terms of vision on the horizon stuff,
Yeah.
I would say that uh, whoever is developing frameworks and then delivering whatever they're going to deliver should have direct experience, knowledge, curiosity, and interest in the phase in which the school is. So if it's an early years, if it's an infant school with a nursery, two form, two reception classes, etc., you must have a team or somebody, and a framework that is built around that phase of life. It's so important. And I would actually think that needs to be a trend in education in general, by which I mean that people who, not the other way, I think sometimes it's done the other way around. People go, oh, secondary, we must all learn about that hard stuff in secondary. Actually, I think it needs to be the other way around. I would love there to be a campaign for all secondary head teachers to have to read and pass a module in early child development. I think it
Mm.
would do everyone a lot of good. But just in terms of as I say, the vision on the horizon is that if you're going to be looking at schools and deciding whether they're on the up or not, and I say that carefully because that might be the answer to my next question, that might be my next thing that I say, is you need to know your staff for that phase. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen, to be clear, at the moment. I saw somebody talking about that the other day, that it's quite often the case that, like, somebody will be inspecting a primary school who's never taught in primary, never led a primary school.
Yeah, exactly that. And then another thing that I think would be interesting and is backward, not really, but there used to be. So I was having a look at the 2012. So in 2019, we had all this education noise, new framework, bish bash bosh. I went back to the 2012 because I wasn't really aware of Ofsted in 2012 as much. It was before I was really in leadership. I was cutting my teeth in the classroom, and they used to be this area called, and actually it was before that, I think. Anyway, somebody who knows more about it than me, I think it went out with the 2012 one, was this little judgment, and there used to be lots more little judgments around capacity to improve. And I think that's really interesting, as in terms of if you visit a school, are they, and a word, I'm just using a word that somebody else said to me, and I'm not saying this is true, but one of the risks maybe of somewhere like Suffolk, and again, there's another thing about there are areas and there are different challenges in different areas. One of the risks is that it becomes a bit parochial, and I'm sorry to use that word, Suffolk, because I love Suffolk, but you might have been a teacher in Suffolk and then a deputy head, and then you're the head of that school, and you might not have really worked that anywhere else, and so you haven't got that wider frame of reference. And so to mitigate that risk, one of the things is somebody coming and going, well, is there capacity here to, it needs a bit of a shake up, and is there capacity for that? And it could be that there isn't, as in, oh no, we're fine, thank you, we don't need to look at any other school. And then you kind of go, I'm not sure if this is going to flourish more and more. Or they go, oh no, don't worry, we're part of a network, and we're actually going to visit Neasden next week because we're really interested in what they're doing with an international project, and you go, oh, okay, so there is this outward looking capacity. Whether I mean to improve, I'm not really sure, but there's a risk. It's thinking about it from a risk-based approach, if you like. So what are the risks here? It's too inward looking, it may just get stagnant. Or actually, is there the support around it? Are they part of a trust? And I'm not saying that's the right thing at all, but are they part of a trust that's got exciting things going on, where there's a lot of leadership support or recruitment or whatever? And then if they don't have capacity, or if it doesn't feel like this school is going to dynamically improve, well, what can we do then? What do we then do? Do we link it with another school? Do we check what the local authority does? Because there's variability across the country. So there's something in that, I think. I just like that capacity to improve or capacity to adapt. And certainly that brings me right back to what I think I said near the beginning with Stafford Beer and the viable systems model, which is basically the question is, does this organisation have a chance of survival? And you just check, and then you check again, and if you get the checks in the right way, to tweak and improve and mend something, but not too much, because if you check it too much, it becomes stagnant. There's something in that, I think. And so I would, as I say, talking about what's on the horizon, definitely age related, which I don't like as a phrase because it's another thing that's taken over. But inspectors that do things that they know about, please, and also capacity to be dynamic, and a check of that, I think. And then the third thing is really high risk stuff, which is safeguarding, regular checking, which actually happens in many trusts, but there's too much variability. So it'd be really good if that became standardized in some respects. I think there could be a real system change there with local authorities, audit model, sharper. There kind of is already. So, there's audits that happen regularly already. So, Ofsted inspectors kind of going, let me look at your single central record, and then being a bit annoying. And I'm not saying safeguarding is annoying, but what I'm saying is they sometimes think they know they've got you on something, and then they don't. And it's a bit of a silly game. Whereas a healthy audit check around safeguarding would actually mean that then the real lovely stuff, if you like, about teaching, learning and organisational development would then be, there'd be more space for that, if you like, separate them off.
Yeah, thank you, that's really interesting. And so with the I totally agree with the first thing. The inspectors need to know what they're talking about, and they need to be of that world in order for it to go well, in order for them to have the insight, and also in order for the people on the other side of this, the school leaders and teachers, to feel like they're dealing with somebody who understands their context, and that trust is really helped there. The capacity to be dynamic and to improve is interesting. It sounds like it's more of a sort of like a bottom-up approach to inspection, like looking at the school and its local context, and it's something that's not just like measuring it against a predetermined set of arbitrary sort of standards of perfection, because like you say, like small schools are very different to very big schools. Different parts of the country are very different to other parts of the country. So this sounds like it's more of just like a grounded theory, sort of like bottom-up approach to understanding what's happening in that school, and to painting a realistic, rich picture of what that school is like. rather than sort of saying, here are all the ways in which it falls short. It's sort of like a deficit model for the schools who don't know how to play that game, you know?
Yes. So in governance, there are different people have kind of defined different approaches to governance in different ways, like everything. There's theories and all that about everything. But networked versus hierarchical, I think, is interesting. And so we are in a very networked governance environment now. A school may be part of a multi-academy trust, so there's a board over there, and then you've got your local school board that does slightly different activities, and I'm incredibly interested in that. I'm actually writing a book on it. So but in terms of there's checks there that are hopefully different, and unfortunately I think that's not well enough defined in many circumstances, and there's a lot of double checking, but that's another conversation. So what you're talking about is this, yes, what it maybe not so much bottom up, but seeing it within its ecosystem. Tell me about your local governing body, tell me about your multi-academy trust, tell me about your local authority, tell me about your deputy head who's doing an MPQSL, tell me about where did you do your MPQH, what did you learn from it, who are your colleagues, tell me about your peer review network system thing that happens in this borough of London or whatever it is. Okay, walk me around your school, tell me what the impact of all those interconnected checky bits, governance essentially, are, what's the impact of it. And then you go, do you know what, the local school board doesn't seem to be doing anything. Well, that needs feeding back. Or if the head goes, actually the board level stuff is real drain and I don't feel like I'm getting enough support, well, that's really relevant. Or they might go, do you know what, there's a new RE league for the trust and they've completely transformed how we do RE and it's so brilliant and great. So then then you're getting this picture of how is the school plugged in, if you like. And I think that's a key area to inspect, if inspect is the right word.
Yeah, it seems like there's a mindset shift that's required here. I imagine that somebody might say, like, in opposition to this argument, they might say, if it's all sort of like looking at the local context and networked stuff and so on, and you said it's not bottom up, but it's sort of just more like contextual. That is therefore not as reliable because you're not able to compare reliably across different schools on the same criteria and form a reliable judgment. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. But my initial response to that is that it's not reliable anyway. Like I think that we pretend that it's reliable because there's this illusion of uniformity in the process. But like we said, like we've heard, so much of it swings on which muscles in the eyebrows of the inspector twitch at particular times and how people interpret those and all of that stuff. It's like this is not a reliable instrument already, and so let's just embrace the complexity and go about this in a much more context-based way rather than pretending that we can just measure everybody on the same slide rule.
I think you've just summarised the quant and the qual debate there. In that, anyone that doesn't know that, quantitative is an illusion, isn't it? And so, whereas qualitative, we go, yes, we know it's rich and complex and different. And so that's what we're going to embrace because it's rich and complex and different. I think that's why single word judgments are really doomed, to be honest, because they're not helpful. You can't compare a 90 pupil school that finds it really hard to recruit because it's somewhere right at the end of the train line to an inner city secondary school. That's just silly. So I think you've hit it there, which is embrace the diversity but building a really rich a framework that has the opportunity for rich conversation and challenge. Because there are schools, I do get worried when I hear people say, "Oh, I haven't heard of that book before," and I think, "How have you not heard of that book?" Or I say to somebody, "So what kind of what early years theories are you interested in?" This is somebody that might run a school, and they go, "Oh, I don't really know." I do get worried about that. So I think there is a real need for professional conversation, dialogue, and challenge, and but in a really positive way,
Mm.
I think that will be the best for the school system, for our children.
Yeah, 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 right. And you know, going back to you saying that the one word judgments are doomed. I've heard people saying in the last week, I think it might have been politicians or somebody saying that that they give parents really important information that they like, and like, I mean, even if that's true, and I think it's questionable that like the extent to which parents rely on those one word judgments, it's crap information. Like you can't sum up like the
No.
complexity of a school in a single word. And like you say, that's the single word. There are schools in this country, by the way, that haven't had a full inspection for 17
I
years.
know. I
And
know.
so that one word judgment, you know, the idea that could describe what the school was like yesterday or 5 years ago is like just for the birds. Like
Yeah,
it's not good information. So yes, we're giving parents information, but it's just nonsense. We're giving them nonsense judgments that are not
yeah.
reliable or informative as to like what their child's experience of that school will actually be like.
Yeah, I think it's actually really dangerous as well, in that we want parents to be engaged with their education. We want them to overlap. And in kind of going, you only need to know that, you're almost saying, don't worry about school because we've got this, or we don't. And that's really just dangerous as well, because the best schools, I can tell you, or primary schools anyway, because that's what I'm in at the moment, are the ones where the parents are really involved, and are in and out, and there's projects and conversations, and it's overlapped. I'm really interested in the edges. It's another permaculture theory about, if you really pay attention to your edges where there's polycultures of overlap, then that's when things get really healthy. And I think by going one word, almost when your children are 3 or 4, you're being sent a little message that says, don't worry, you don't need to read much. You just need to know that, and then send them in at the door. Whereas if it's like, actually come and visit, come and talk to the teachers, here's a, and also we do a disservice to parents, don't we? I think all parents can read a couple of pages rather than 4 words. And if they need it in a different language, or, they need some help with that, well, then we will facilitate that, absolutely. But to say, oh, well, they just need 1 word, I think I'm a parent of 3.
Yeah.
I'd like more than 1 word, thank you very much.
Well, also, I mean, this idea of like Labour are talking about having some sort of a report. This is an idea
Yeah,
that
report card.
I've been kicking around recently as well. A bit like on a packet of crisps or whatever, and it's like sugar, fat, salt, and it's like like sort of has different traffic light colours as to how like what different metrics are like. And I think that there's some value in that. And if those included things like, do the children say that they're happy? Like what's teacher retention like? That's a really good barometer of like what the school is like. Is there very high staff turnover, so that the longevity of relationships isn't going to be there? There are loads of things that we could look at, that would be that I'm sure that parents would love to see. Whereas the quality of teaching and learning versus curriculum versus behavior, and then just to come back to your other thing about safeguarding, and how we need regular safeguarding checks. I've yet to meet a head teacher who says that they would not be up for that. Like nobody has a problem with being audited to make sure that the kids are safe. But there's, sorry, did you want to come in there?
Well, I was going to say we do it already. I think that's another question about duplication of effort, actually, in that, in this county, there's an audit that we have to fill in, or and so it might need tightening or changing, but that's already happening. And then in the trust that I work with, it was EACT, actually, if you want to Google them, and they developed a really interesting model, and they've changed it, and because things evolve. But at the time that I was involved with them, they developed this, what I called, I don't think they did, but I kind of called it a professionalized governance model. And they had safeguarding system leaders who would do precisely that. So they would go in and they would have an audit model, and they would look through and check and blah, blah, blah. And then they would give actions, and then we would report back within 6 weeks whether it was done or not. And some of it was quick fixes, because and whatever, and some of it was harder stuff, because some of the school, some big secondary schools in complex areas in London, areas needed tackling in a longer term way in terms of the curriculum for the children, them learning, engagement with the parents, and blah blah blah. But I thought that was a good model. But what you don't want is it happening 3 times by 3 different people looking at with slightly different worded questions. So it's something that could be done. If it could be done systematically, that would be really good.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've been thinking, and this is going in a different direction to what you just said, is that I think that part of the problem is that Ofsted's remit has become so broad that they're looking at all of this stuff down to that, defining what they think learning is and all of that, and just stuff that should be in the hands of trained, qualified, professional people who know what they're talking about. That they're not able to even on their own scorecard of making out safeguarding is the most important thing, and it's the gatekeeper judgment, and if you're not good for safeguarding, then the whole school is all right. But if they're not inspecting schools in 17 years, they might have done a monitoring visit in that time, but still, maybe 1 or 2 in that time. That's not making sure that those schools are safe. If safeguarding is your raison d'etre, then do it every year, and just so maybe there should be a vastly slimmed down version of Ofsted that just does these annual safeguarding checks. But and this is where it potentially clashes with what you just said, because you were saying that those safeguarding checks could be done elsewhere. And then I was thinking that all the other stuff, like the peer review model, where schools buddy up with another local school and they have a cross-sectional team involving pupils, teaching assistants, the Senco, senior leaders, middle leaders, and they observe other schools and they observe that school. And it could be around a theme, it could be around feedback or behavior or whatever it is that the school's self-evaluation says that they want to develop. And it's something that's strength-based, that's led through, appreciative inquiry. And you could have a system that would sit alongside this sort of, a safety auditor, essentially, that's more developmental, that's looking at all of that other stuff, and that recognizes and celebrates the diversity and the fact that a one-size-fits-all system is not going to be able to cater to the needs for such a large, diverse population of schools, of people, of kids.
Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it, as to what can be centralised, if you like, and systematized, and what can't be. And I am actually a big fan of systems, in terms of I think it'd be quite good if all schools had the same website. Everyone might be going, horror, but in terms of obviously the content within the different pages, but the amount of headache that schools go through, going,
really
what's
point.
the checklist, and have we got this, and the uniform policy, and I think, do you know what, if the government just said, here's your website, put the bits on, and then you have your ability to put up photos and whatever, and make it yours, then the amount of stress that we all have trying to work out whether and the messy old ones that we layer on top of, I think that could be centralized, whereas curriculum approaches should not be centralized. So that's a lovely question to ask. Maybe that's the starting point.
Interesting, and maybe that's a nice ending point to end on a question like, to what extent does this need to be centralized? What can we kick out? And like you say, I really loved what you were talking about just like unleashing the professional knowledge, the decision-making capacity for people to not switch off their brains, to not just think, as long as we're just sort of doing what Ofsted says, then we don't need to really think about this much more, to actually to be engaged in like an ongoing dialogue within our communities, with everybody throughout our communities, with parents, with kids, with researchers, with the evidence base, figuring out how to do this best in a way that and autonomy is absolutely key to that. Like you can't have that culture in a compliance culture. It just doesn't work in a compliance machine, if you like, in a fidelity machine. You can't have that kind of people-powered innovation happening. We need to loosen those screws and set people free to do what they think is right, while recognizing the need to, like you say, to check in on them every now and then.
Yeah, I pose I think I pose an interesting question in a little bit of writing that I'm doing for this book that I'm on with governance, and which is governance or checks are very easy in some ways when it's the trunchbull in charge of a school, because you go, well, that's inappropriate, that can't happen, we must sort that out, and blah blah blah. And well, actually, where's the governing body in Matilda is the kind of press. So in a trunchbull situation, in some ways it's easy, but then the big question, which is just what you were saying, is what do we do when it's Miss Honey? When it's wonderful, what's the role of Ofsted there? And what's the role of checking or governance when the school's wonderful? Surely it's to just add a little bit of energy and spin the wheel again, to just keep it going. Maybe, I don't know, but I think that's a really good. When things go wrong and it's bad, we can go check. But when things are healthy and good, which is surely our aspiration, well, then the questions start getting really interesting.
Yes, although to play the devil's advocate, doesn't Matilda go and live with Miss Honey, which is a bit of a safeguarding red flag. All right, well, Rebecca, thank you so much for responding to my tweet, for taking the time to chat with me this morning. It's really lovely to meet you and to get to know you a little. Do come to I'd love to see if you'd be interested to come and speak at the Rethinking Education conference, which is going to be happening on Saturday, the 23rd of September this year in North London. We've just finalized the venue this week, so we had our first one last year, and it was just absolutely a wonderful day. Kids on the stages.
Can I come and talk about permaculture and its relevance for school systems?
Do you know what? Yeah, I've wanted to pick up on that. I love the fact that you've been talking about permaculture throughout this conversation. Yeah, please do. Absolutely.
Amazing.
Perfect. Right, you're in. All right. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to find me, I'm really interested in sensible and respectful debate. And so I'm on Twitter. If you just at Rebecca Leek, LEEK _, because somebody else got Rebecca Leek without the underscore. How dare they? So that's me, and I'm sure you'll put that in somewhere. But I'm really love a good conversation. So find me there. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.